Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about the 7 stanchions of separation. And specifically today, we're going to talk about YouTube as one of the 7 stanchions. So, Professor Dungeonmaster over on Dungeon Craft did an incredibly important video. The reasons why Dungeons and Dragons 5e is king of the hill and is the 800-pound gorilla, and really has really separated itself from the pack and really doesn't stand with the rest of the industry. It doesn't really compete with the rest of the industry. It doesn't compete with any competitor in the industry. It competes with the entire industry, right? And so, and he gave these 6 reasons why Dungeons and Dragons is so different and why it's absolutely dominating the industry right now, because it is dominating in the industry at a level that is really starting to shock people. I mean, nobody was surprised, but people were like, we didn't know D&D was this far ahead. And they're like, there's just a drumbeat of events that are really separating D&D, okay? So you'll find Dungeon Craft's video in the link below. Really, I think it's the most important video to come out in like a year, right? Because it addresses the elephant in the room. Like, D&D's been winning for a long time, but not at the rate and the scale and the impact it's winning now, right? So I wanted to talk. So actually, I've been addressing each of these points individually, and I wanted to talk about YouTube. So YouTube is, why does D&D 5e get so much traction from YouTube that other games simply don't, right? So it is astounding how powerful Dungeons and Dragons YouTube presence is, right? And you know what? I really we can't even move forward and talk about YouTube until we talk about YouTube and D&D, until we talk about YouTube. Just to be clear, right? YouTube's it's less than 2 decades old, right? And it might be a little older than that, but it's really only been standing for like 2 decades. So just to be clear, D&D 1e, D&D 2e had no YouTube. D&D 3e, functionally, in my opinion, really didn't have YouTube. It didn't matter much, right? D&D 4e and 5e was YouTube, and D&D 3, to be clear, D&D 3e had YouTube, okay? But YouTube wasn't a thing. And by the way, Google bought YouTube, and when Google bought YouTube, they put the hammer down, right? That vehicle started like really putting out the gas, right? And really surging forward, right? And so here's the thing. And I'm a huge Google fan, and I really think that the fact that it's owned by Google is a really, really big deal, right? All right, so basically, YouTube, right, for 1, 2, and 3 really didn't. 1 and 2, it literally didn't exist. 3, YouTube existed, but not at the level of power it exists now. So for 3E, YouTube's impact on 3E was marginal at best, okay? But 2008 is when 3E ended and 4E started, and that is when YouTube was kicking, right? And today, YouTube is a force to be reckoned with. I don't think people really don't understand how powerful YouTube is, right? For one, I got kids, right? And my 2 youngest kids, you could spend $200 million on a scripted, high CGI epic, right? And my kids will far prefer 3 TikToks. And actually, yeah. So one of my kids watches a lot of TikTok. My other kid watches a ton of YouTube. Oh, and even both my kids watch. Actually, I will say. So one of my kids watches a lot of YouTube, right? And then one of my other kids watches more YouTube than they do of any scripted television, right? And so YouTube is fast replacing the classic streamers that people are, and is probably the greatest threat to real streamers, right? So D&D has a very, very, essentially intimate relationship with YouTube. Dungeons and Dragons, 4th and 5th edition have been marinated in YouTube, okay? And it is a thick and brothy stew, it is a thick and brothy marinade, right? And the thing is, YouTube very legitimately has made has made Dungeons and Dragons just dramatically better than it ever would have been without YouTube. So 4th and 5th edition are much, much better editions because of YouTube than they ever could have been without. And I mean, you're like, well, why is that? Well, the reality is Dungeonmasters and players didn't have to wonder how the game was played. They've been shown how the game was played by literally 100, maybe 1,000 different, easily 1,000 different campaigns have been streamed from front to start, right, on YouTube. And Mercer's like the best of them, right? And the reality is, you don't have to wonder how YouTube is played. You can see it, right? Like, you can see it from start to finish. You could see what the best players do. You could see what the best Dungeon Masters do. You can see how, like, and there are there are animated like, one of the best things on YouTube is a channel that literally explains every single, D&D spell with animated cartoons. Like, no edition has that, right? And so so D&D just it's D&D 4th and 5th edition were born, you adapted to the dark. I was born in the dark, right? Dungeons and Dragons 4th and 5th edition were born in YouTube, right? Like, and they have been brought up through YouTube. And yes, many other tabletop role-playing games have YouTube channels, but nothing like D&D, right? And so many people have tried to have stream games. So many people have tried to beat Mercer. So many people want to do D&D commentary that, like, it has caused a tradition of competition that has driven the highest quality content on tabletop role-playing games on YouTube to be D&D and nothing else. Like, Nonat, he's got a great Pathfinder channel, right? He stands alone in a field. That dude, like, ain't nobody doing, Pathfinder content. And if you do, like, and this is why, and another thing is, like, the reason why there really aren't that many OSC channels or, Five Torches Deep channels or anything like that is every single creator's like, well, do I want 1,000 subs or do I want 100 subs? If I do D&D 5e, I get 1,000 subs. If I do anything else, I get 100 subs. It's ridiculous, right? And if you think I'm wrong, just pick, some non-D&D TTPRG channel, and I'll show you a D&D 5th edition channel, frankly, that far outpaces it. And the reality is, even beyond that, even if you want to do a D&D, a non-D&D channel, you still end up talking about D&D a lot, right? So, like, D&D and YouTube are, like, really, YouTube has been a turbo boost for 4th and 5th edition, and it is massively important to why D&D has just accelerated past its competitors, because it mastered the YouTube game, and YouTube loves Dungeons and Dragons, just like Hollywood loves Dungeons and Dragons, and just like the show is name checked in literally hundreds of shows now. It's ridiculous. Like, it's getting easier to count the shows where D&D is not name checked. It is legit. Right, so all that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.